The Prime Minister.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, we've just heard from that great sycophant of billionaires, the leader of the opposition.
And we are going to make our country great again.
Okay, it's the Thursday before the long weekend for Easter, and we're looking forward to this, having a chat with Mark Latham this afternoon. Hello, Mark. How are you?
G'day, Brent. I'm really well. Yourself?
I'm good, thank you, Mark. Looking forward to a couple of days off. I imagine you're doing much the same.
Yeah, it's always a good time of year, you know. That holiday comes at about the right time. We've been working hard since Australia Day, basically, so time for a little break and all the religious observances that go with Easter.
Absolutely. 12:45, I've been busy on the radio, but it was supposedly a press conference at 12:45 this afternoon. The Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, has abandoned plans to knock down and rebuild ANZ Stadium, but she'll go ahead with its proposal for Alliance at Moore Park. It's understood the former Olympic Stadium at Sydney Olympic Park will instead be refurbished and transformed into a rectangular stadium, Mark.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. The stadium is actually less than 20 years old, and it's got the heritage of being an Olympic stadium. I know when I visit different places around the world, particularly as a young person, going to the Olympic Stadium and soaking up all that heritage and memories of Olympic Games is part of the tourist activity. So I think to knock down an Olympic stadium not yet 2 decades old was a massive mistake. You go there to watch the footy. It's not the best viewing, but the facilities are new enough. So I think that is the right strategy to turn it into the rectangular stadium for the rugby league, the rugby union, the soccer, and so forth, and give the spectators some better viewpoints of the ground. So it's a step in the right direction. There's been a massive public outcry about spending billions on the knockdown and rebuild of footy grounds. So I think the Premier has pulled ahead in and listened to the public, at least in half of the debate.
I suppose it was being summed up in an email I got about 3 minutes ago. It said, good decision. Alliance is dangerous and must be rebuilt or abandoned. ANZ can be refurbished much more cheaply. They got it right for a change. Can I ask you, Mark, because you've been there, done that, you know, this was obviously partly... was her decision based on the fact that there was so much public outcry as to it's the wrong decision, you don't need to spend this much money? Was it that... plus you put together the fact that there were MPs that were really concerned, privately expressing their concerns over the policy?
Yeah, there was a Liberal Party upper house member who said that the government's got its priorities wrong, spending billions on the redevelopment of footy grounds when they're not doing enough in basic child protection services. So that was a damning critique from one of their own people. But I think the thing that inevitably moves political opinion is the polling. There was a poll recently showing that Labor and the Coalition are 50-50 in New South Wales, 12 months out from the election. So Berejiklian knew this was a dead weight in terms of their chances of being re-elected. She had to do something. It is a response to political reality, I think, but also the common sense that, you know, all the things that need to be done, congestion and demountable school buildings, lack of health facilities, they're the things the public pay their taxes to have governments provide, and the footy ground thing just seemed like a real indulgence for the elites that would gather in the corporate boxes and the like that are rebuilt. So, you know, I think it's conceding to the inevitable on many fronts.
Apparently it's going to save $500 million as well.
Well, $500 million, that's money that can be spent on schools and hospitals. It starts to negate the campaign that Luke Foley, as opposition leader, has been running, and you know, I'm sure there are many people around New South Wales saying, look, we could spend $500 million in our community to upgrade infrastructure at the drop of a hat.
What does and I'll call that a backflip, I don't mean to be derogatory now, but what does a change of mind do to governments like that? Generally, do the voters say, okay, you were man enough, or woman enough in this case, to stand up and say, yeah, we made a mistake and this is the new direction we go? Is it a positive for them in the elections, or a negative?
I think it's a positive in that public trust in politics is down in the cellar. Nobody has got a good word to say about Labor or Liberal, so to be seen to be responding to public opinion is a good thing. This was a dumb mistake. The Sports Minister, Stuart Ayres, is a very arrogant person, always thinks he knows best. It was a waste of money, particularly at Homebush, and to respond to public opinion does rebuild a bit of trust in the Berejiklian government, and a good sign that at least she's prepared to listen.
Good. This week, I suppose, the main story has been, well, there's two. There's the Russian expulsions and, of course, the cricket. Let's talk about the cricket suspensions. The sanctions were announced overnight. Steve Smith has been met with jeers of cheat and booze as he was leaving the airport this morning in South Africa. I did read somewhere that when they fly into Australia, he has been told by Cricket Australia that he has to front a press conference. That's going to be a hard one for him.
Yeah, it's very difficult. They cheated, there's no doubt. They've copped a punishment. I think in the case of David Warner saying he can never ever again be part of leadership in Australian cricket, a lifetime ban is over the top. I mean, who in their 20s never made a mistake? Part of growing up and getting through your 20s and into middle age and proper maturity is that you make a mistake. I don't like the idea of a lifetime ban on Warner. He's not everyone's cup of tea, but he did lead the T20 team for Australia very effectively in our last summer, just a couple of months ago. And to say to this young man, look, you never again can be part of the leadership of Australian cricket is excessive. In that, you know, you need to give people a second, third and even a fourth chance in life at that age. And, geez, you look at the number of people in the sporting arena or even the media who put in absolute shockers. You know, there's elite sports people in Australia, NRL players running around who've beaten people up or been in jail for selling drugs. They get a second chance because you throw people on the scrap heap in their 20s. Geez, it's tough going, isn't it? So, you know, they've really, really copped it. I think a lot of the media stuff has been over the top. I hate the idea of Smith there being hounded at the South African airport. People talk a lot about minorities in society. Well, the smallest minority is actually the individual. And unfortunately, too often, justice is now dispensed by the pack, baying for the blood of an individual, isolating and humiliating them. And, geez, they really copped it, haven't they? And these punishments are at the outer end of severity. And you've got people like Shane Warne saying, geez, you've gone over the top here, and I tend to agree.
It's not over yet, though, because there's been talk of lawyers being involved. So, you know, I suppose it will become a fought out in the courts, maybe.
Well, maybe, but I'll tell you what I don't like is that the South Africans who abused Warner's wife in the most disgusting manner, not just their players, but officials, media and fans, the South Africans, their fast bowler, put the shoulder into our captain. They've got a captain, Faf du Plessis, who twice has been guilty of ball tampering. He didn't get suspended for life from their leadership. He's now their captain. He got promoted into the national captaincy of the South African cricket team. The South Africans must be sitting back laughing their heads off at how Australia has hopped into our own. Sure, they needed some punishment, but, geez, the South Africans must think, you know, we had a bloke, Faf there, twice convicted of ball tampering. We promoted him into the captaincy. We've dealt with the Australians. They've been sent home. And obviously South Africa's going to smash us in the fourth test. So It just doesn't seem fair on the international cricket scene that those South Africans have got away basically with everything, and our blokes have had the kitchen sink thrown at them.
I'll tell you what it brings out, though, and you don't think about this much. You know they do well, but you don't realise how much money these guys at the top of their game play. They earn, apparently, Smith and Warner are to lose a reported $6 million each in the next 12 months as a result of this ban.
Well, of course. I mean, they're copping it on all fronts. They can't play any form of cricket for 12 months, not even for their grade club down on the playing fields of Sutherland, in Steve Smith's case. And those corporate sponsors, aren't they leeches? You know, they latch onto these players to sell their Weet-Bix, to sell their sporting shoes, and soon as the blokes get in trouble, they drop them like a bad habit.
Yeah,
there's no loyalty out there in the
Absolutely.
corporate world. And I tell you what, if the sponsors think that loyal cricket fans look at this favourably, you know, I say to the sponsors, you're leeches on the sporting world. You're in it just for yourself, and if the player's image is honky-dory, well, you know, you're trying to cash in. And, you know, how about a bit of loyalty? You put all that money in Steve Smith's pocket and now you're dumping him. How about standing by the guy for 5 minutes before dropping him like, you know, he's a smelly drug dealer or something? You know, it's just way over the top.
Well said, well said. What do you think is going to be the reaction if we talk about Russia now with Australia? They say Australia's bracing for a diplomatic counterpunch from Russia, which has warned that moves such as expelling its spies over the nerve agent attack will erode relations on which peace and security rest. That's the official line.
Well, Brent, don't you think it's kind of amazing we're getting into a stance with Russia? We've had an issue with them in the shooting down of MH17. That's very serious, and our government needs to get to the bottom of the facts of who's culpable for that. But otherwise, Australia's foreign policy needs to be framed around things in our part of the world, things that matter to us. And this James Bond-style stoush between the British government and the Russians, how's Australia got in the middle of that when you look at the things happening in our own part of the world? You know, Julie Bishop had that theatrical display with the Russian ambassador, all the cameras there.
Yeah.
On the same day, China was announcing that North Korea has pledged to eliminate the nuclear weapons on the Korean peninsula. Now, some of those missiles potentially could have reached the northern parts of Australia. So there's a huge, huge issue with Australian interests directly involved in our part of the world. No, you know, that's not the focus for our foreign minister. She's off doing theatrical media stunts, staring like a boxer at the Russian ambassador. I just think we need to stick to the things that matter in our part of the world. If the Poms have got a stoush on with the Russians, that's their business, but I don't see how, in the general nature of our foreign policy, we need to be provoking the Russian bear when there's many more important things in our part of the world.
Couldn't agree with you more. When it first came through, I thought, what are we doing getting involved in this? I mean, do we need to be seen supporting, Britain and the United States all the time?
Well, that's what happens, and again, it's on the basis of an intelligence report. Some experts, like Tom Switzer at the Centre for Independent Studies, say, look, you don't trust these intelligence reports. They're the sort of thing that got us into the war in Iraq when Saddam Hussein had no weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah.
Iraq became terrorism central, and we're still paying the price for that. Be cautious about these intelligence reports, and I've got to say, an ex-spy getting bumped off and they're allegation, it really is like a James Bond movie, isn't it? And I don't see why Australia needs to immerse itself in those activities when you look at the serious situation, South China Sea, North Korea, issues with the Pacific Islands, Indonesia, radical terrorism there, many more issues directly in our part of the world where Australia should be putting our foreign policy energy instead of getting caught up in a spy thriller on the other side of the world.
Do you think that looking at the corporate tax situation, it's put on ice, they say, but do you think it's... I was reading an article this morning, Mark, and they were saying that it looks like it's gone. Malcolm Turnbull's all saying we'll bring it back when Parliament sits again, but it looks like it's possibly gone.
Well, I suppose so, and that mightn't be a bad thing, because quite frankly, the bigger priority should be income tax relief for workers, for professional people, for those in particular that are paying the 47% top marginal tax rate. So how about some tax relief for families, for individuals, for the pay-as-you-go taxpayer?
Yeah.
I think the corporation should have been the number 2 or 3 priority. So if there's money that can come up in the budget now to give the hard workers out there a bit of tax relief, they're not getting a wage increase. They need government to get off their back. The tax man to not reach as far into our pocket. So it might give the Turnbull government a chance to recalibrate its priorities, and that's probably a good thing.
If only he would listen.
Berejiklian did. We live in hope.
Yeah, we do, don't we? An Australian Super Hornet airstrike last year may have killed 2 civilian adults and injured 2 children when it bombed a terraced house in Iraq. This is a Channel 7 report, and I notice it's on other news stories today now.
Yeah, well, it's a tragedy. We can't blame our armed forces because if you run enough of these missions, inevitably there'll be an error, in this case a tragic error. So our service people do a wonderful job at home and abroad. But quite frankly, it comes back to that earlier point I made about intelligence reports. We got into Iraq based on false intelligence. Saddam didn't have the weapons of mass destruction. The terrorist activity has flooded into Iraq. It created ISIS. All the problems that have come to countries like Australia and many others around the world in the years since, and we're still there. We're still there, and my fear is that foreign interference in the Middle East always increases the radicalisation of the home population. And quite frankly, the Middle East is basically a sectarian problem. You've got radical Sunnis wanting to kill radical Shias, these religious Islamic sects. Well, if they want to get stuck into each other, why would Australia get in the middle of any of that? And it does tend to make the problem worse. Issues like the one that's come up today, the mistaken bombing and death of those people, it radicalises their family, their community. It makes the problem worse. And we should never have got into Iraq in the first
place. Yeah, many people would agree with you there. On your Outsiders Facebook page, you've got a story about how Malcolm Turnbull failed to deliver on his promise for abolishing the Safe Schools program, and now it's at the University of Technology in Sydney in their Year 1 education course. They're teaching exploring gender. What's this all about?
Yeah, well, we thought we got rid of the Safe Schools program in New South Wales, and Turnbull cut off the federal funding, but this is a backdoor way, because the education degree at UTS is saying to the teachers of the future, teach safe schools in the classroom. And it seems to me Turnbull should be saying to the university, we're not giving you funding for that, it's our policy to be against it. And Brent, I've got to say to you, as the parent of a young girl and boys that have got a bit older, it's every parent's dread that a 6 or 7 year old would come home from school, a little girl come home from school and say, Dad, I can be a boy. I mean, this is what gender fluidity and safe schools teaches. It tells little girls they can be boys and little boys they can be girls. Now, for a very, very tiny percentage of the population, these issues do arise, but it's for the family to sort them out, not to put confusing thoughts in the heads of little kids, making their life more confusing. I mean, the stability of the nuclear family and the guidance of loving parents is the best thing kids can ever have. You talk about mental illness. Well, mental illness comes from confusion, from lunatics in the schools telling little kids these things that don't help them at all. So if the issue does come up, let the parents handle it, and for goodness sake, the universities and the schools, get out of our lives.
Absolutely. Have a happy Easter. We'll catch up with you next week.
You
if you're
too,
on the
Brent.
roads, be safe. Thank you, Mark Latham. We'll talk next week. Bye-bye, Mark.